week on our series on Elisha. In the first week, we burned some ploughs. And the lessons that we learned from that story were that you don't have to understand fully to obey immediately. And also that those God uses the most are those who hang on to least. Then last week, we were digging ditches. And we learned that your greatest need becomes a blessing when it drives you to depend on God. And also, it's only God that can send the water, but sometimes He wants you to dig a ditch. Next week, we're going to be thinking about grabbing our edge back when we'll be thinking of the story of a floating axe head. But today, we are gathering jars. I believe that God does speak, and I believe that God wants to speak to each of us who are here this morning, but especially if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed. You've got just so much going on, you just don't have enough time or energy, or if you're facing uncertainty. Maybe even for those who just feel that they are a bit low on faith. Our text from 2 Kings chapter 4. I want to read the first two verses again just to get the context of the story. And here's how it starts. The wife of a man from the company of prophets cried out to Elisha, "Your servant, my husband, is dead. And you know that he revered the Lord, but now his creditor is coming to take my 2 boys as slaves." Elisha replied to her, "How can I help you? Tell me, what do you have in your house?" "Your servant has nothing there at all," she said, "except a small jar of olive oil." Your servant has nothing at all except a small jar of olive oil. First thing that I want to notice is we're never told this woman's name. It's not that she doesn't matter, it's that her name doesn't matter. God works through anybody and everybody. Nobody is too insignificant for God to bless and to provide for. In the Jewish tradition, it's thought that she was actually the wife of the prophet Obadiah. Now, if that was the case, then it would be no great surprise that she was left destitute, because he was famous for having encouraged and supported another 50 prophets. So I suspect all of his money was going to them. But also, it wasn't uncommon for a prophet and his family to have to travel around a lot to escape the authorities, and it was a kind of hand-to-mouth existence. And so here's this lady whose husband has spent his life serving God, but he's died. She has no chance of proper, meaningful employment, because in that culture, women were unemployable, except as prostitutes. And so this creditor is coming, and he's going to take the boys and he's going to make them his slaves, and that would be until there was a year of jubilee when slaves were to be set free. She's about to lose everything, and humanly speaking, there is no hope for her. The fact is that there are many people in the world, many people in our area who are in that situation even today. And that should actually make us think about our priorities and our attitudes. You know, we get upset at the most insignificant things. When you're at home and the Wi-Fi stops working, it's the end of the world when you can't get online, or at least in our house it seems like it. Or you've gone out for a meal and they've overcooked something. Tragedy. My favourite for me is, you've got the lovely wee pack of spreadable butter. Why do you need to dig into it? You spread it. That's the point. It's spreadable. Right? Sorry, I'll come back now. But do you know, we get upset and annoyed at the most ridiculous and insignificant things. They're like entry-level problems in the scheme of life. But the reality is that many people, even some people here in this room, have graduate-level problems that are happening right now. There are people who are barely hanging on to their relationships, to their marriage, to their family. Some who just don't know how they're going to make it at all. Maybe you're here and somebody that you've loved and trusted has betrayed you and hurt you, and you simply don't know what's happening with that relationship. Maybe you've got a child and you see them making decisions that you know are going to cause them pain and hurt. And you're in agony because it doesn't matter what you say. You just can't get through. Maybe you're struggling financially, or you're struggling with your health. Whatever it may be, you're simply not sure how you're going to deal with it. And the key thought for today is this: when you don't have what you really want, you'll discover that God is what you really need. When you don't have what you really want, you'll discover that God is what you really need. This woman tells Elisha the problem, and he does something which is really quite significant. But first, let's think about what he didn't do. He doesn't say, "Oh, that's a shame, hen." You know, he doesn't say, "Oh, that's terrible. I'll be thinking about you." That always gets me. Why would you want to think about me? I don't really want you to think about me. I want you to do something useful. I want you, even if you can't do anything practical, I want you to pray for me. I want you to do something significant and important. When I'm really struggling, I'm at the end of my tether, I don't know what I'm going to do next, I don't want you to be thinking about me. I understand that there's a kind of nice, gentle message in that. But actually, I want you to do something. I want you to, at the very least, pray for me. And so Elisha does something significant. He makes himself available to this woman. He stops and he listens. And when she has explained what her problem is, he says these really important and significant words. 5 of them. How can I help you? Here's my problem, Elisha. How can I help you? Do you want to make a difference in the world? Do you want a life that is filled with joy? Do you want to serve God? Then every morning I would suggest that what you should do is get up and say, "Father, today I am available to serve you. When I come across problems, will you use me to minister to that problem? I might not be able to do anything practical, but I can pray." And then when we go to work or school or wherever it is and somebody says, "Do you know, I'm really struggling. My husband's driving me daft. My children are going berserk. I don't know how I'm going to pay this bill." What do we say? How can I help you? What can I do to help you? And make ourselves available just like Jesus would. And then Elisha says this seemingly ridiculous thing, but actually it's very profound. "Tell me, what do you have in your house?" He respects her dignity. He's not saying, "Yeah, you've come to me. I've got all the answers. I can tell you exactly what to do next. No problem." What he says is, "Tell me what you have." What he's saying really is, let's start with what you have and let God meet your needs through what you have. It's really easy when you're struggling with something to miss all of the blessings that you do have and focus on what you don't have. I don't have enough money. I don't have any friends. I don't have a nice house, so I couldn't possibly have a house group, because we all know that God only works in nice houses. Like me, you may actually have done this yourself. You go to the wardrobe You open the door, you look at all the stuff hanging there, and you say, I've got nothing to wear. You could probably clothe a whole village in some places with what's in your wardrobe. I've nothing to wear. Isn't it funny how we focus on what we don't have? What do you do if you don't have much? If you really don't have much? Well, I think the lesson from Elisha here is this: to stop waiting for what you want and start working with what you have. Stop waiting for what you want and start working with what you have. You see, she starts off saying, I have nothing at home except I've got this wee jar of oil. Olive oil was incredibly valuable because it was quite rare and it has lots of uses. It was used in cooking, it was used in oil lamps, it was used as a moisturizer before you went to Boots or the Body Shop. It was used as a way to keep iron from rusting. It was used to help keep leather pliable. It was used to anoint people in religious services. It was a great thing. And so if you had it, you could sell it, and it was very valuable. It was valuable, but she didn't have very much of it. She only had a small amount. Do you know what? I am so thankful that we serve a God who is able to do amazing things with a tiny little. In the New Testament, there's a story where Jesus has been teaching thousands and thousands of people, and it gets to be tea time. And he says to the disciples, go on and give them their tea. They say, well, hang on a minute, where are we going to get the food for all of these people? And they're beginning to panic. And a small boy comes along and says, do you know what? I've got some loaves and some fish. You can have them. And in the hands of Jesus, that 5 loaves and 2 fish fed thousands and thousands of people with enough left over to fill 12 baskets. Because God is able to take a little and do a lot with it. And then I was saying about David and Goliath. Here's this young boy, and he comes, and his view of God is totally different to the view of the rest of the Israelites. Effectively, what David is saying is this: who are you to come against the armies of the living God? Everyone thinks you're too big to beat. I think you're too big to miss. And off he went. And down went Goliath. Jesus says if we have a faith that is as small even as the smallest seed, a mustard seed, then we can move mountains. You don't need much for God to do amazing things. And so Elisha says, what do you have in your house? God once asked Moses, what do you have in your hand? And he said, it's a stick. Woohoo! It's a stick. But with that stick, he parted the sea, and with that stick, he hit a rock and water came gushing out. With that stick, amazing things happened. Why? Because it's not just a stick when you give it to God. He didn't ask, what do you want? He didn't even ask, what do you need? What he asked was, what do you have? What do you have? Let's stop waiting for what we want and start working with what we have. Because God has given us everything that we need to do everything he wants us to do. So many people say we can't because we don't. We can't employ somebody because we don't have money. We can't start a new project because we don't have people. I think a person of faith actually says the opposite. The person who has faith says we can because we don't. We can do it because we don't have it. When we started talking about Messy Church, it was in a context of having struggled financially for a few years. And the first question that people asked when we suggested doing Messy Church was, how are we going to pay for it? Wasn't, will it work? Why are we doing it? Wasn't any of those things. It was, how are we going to pay for it? Well, the truth is, there was no money to pay for it. But some of us felt it was the right thing to do and that God was calling us there. And so we went and we did it. And through the generosity of God's people, we were never without the money that we needed. We were able to buy the resources that were required. In fact, we were able to buy lots of things that were a kind of dream, but the money came in to enable us to do it. Started with a few people. I think the most we had at one was 74 or 75. We've built up a core group of maybe 40 or 50 that come regularly. We didn't have, but we went and did anyway. Last year, the session agreed that the gathering and Messy Church would be our outreach in Moncton. They would replace the then existing evening services. And so we've been able to budget for that this year. But not only that, the Messy Church team have been able to give something back to the church because God gave enough that there was money left over. You see, when you do something because you believe God's calling you to do it, then you also believe that God will resource it. That God will give you the money you need, and God will give you the people you need, and God will give you the time you need. Because it's God that's saying, do this. I'm so thankful that God has begun to teach us the lesson that we can do things that seem impossible when we do them with Him and for Him. Some of you may have been waiting to serve God in the church, but you didn't think you were ready. Or you thought that somebody else might be better at it. You didn't have the training or the ability. There was something holding you back. You're waiting for something to happen, something to change so that you can do that thing that's on your heart. Well, today I want to say this to you. Stop waiting for what you want and start working with what you have. Just do it. And if it's God that's calling, then God will see it to completion. The second thing that we learn from this story is this, that we are to offer God what we have and trust Him to give us what we need. Offer to God what you have and trust Him to give you what you need. It came true for this widow and her boy. She's told to go and to collect the jars, and it seems a totally ridiculous thing to do. I've got a tiny wee jar of oil. Oh, go and collect more jars. Huh? You know, I would be thinking, what are my neighbours going to say when I go to them and say, can you give me some containers? I'm going to get some oil. How's that going to work? They're going to look at you as if you're daft. It seems totally ridiculous. First, it was burning ploughs. Then it was digging ditches. Today, it's collecting jars. Three things that, humanly speaking, are ridiculous. They're stupid things to do. But, this lady was faithful. She did what she was told to do. She gathered the jars and she got the oil, and God blessed her not just with enough to sell to pay off the debt, but enough to live on with her family. What's the point of collecting jars when you have no oil to fill them? Well, faith is the point. God gave her what she needed. It was only when she ran out of jars that they ran out of oil. She had enough to pay her debts. How would you have felt if you were her? And Elisha says, go and pour out the only thing that you've got. See that wee bit of oil you've got? Go and pour it out into another bigger jar. And yet that's what she did. She trusted God to provide because Elisha had told her that that's what she was to do. You see, when we show God our faith, He shows us His faithfulness. But at some point, when you take what you have and you stop waiting for what you want and you offer to God what you have, God does something special. God does something amazing in the lives of His children when we trust Him. Elisha says to her, go and get a bunch of jars. Notice he didn't say they have to be a particular color or a particular size or a particular shape. What did he say? The only thing, the only requirement of these jars is that they were empty. It could have been any kind of jar. It could have been a milk jug, a peanut butter jar, the remains of spreadable butter tin. God can use any shape, size, color. He just needs it to be empty. How does that apply to us? Well, 2 Corinthians 4:7 says this. We have this treasure which is Christ in jars of clay. What's it referring to? Well, it's referring to our bodies. Our bodies, we are clay pots. That's what it says. We have this treasure. We have Jesus in this jar of clay. What is God looking for? He's looking for empty jars. He's looking for people who will empty themselves of themselves. Empty themselves of pride. Empty themselves of greed. Empty themselves of their own agenda. And come to Him and say, here I am. Empty and waiting to be filled. And His promise is that at that moment He will fill that jar with oil, with the Holy Spirit, for whom oil is the symbol. And suddenly you realize that when you don't outwardly have what you wanted, it's God that you really needed all along. And suddenly He's enough. He's sufficient in every single way. You see, when you're weak, He is your strength. When you're hurting, He is your comforter. When you're lost, He is your guide. When you're hungry, He is the bread of life that satisfies and nourishes you. When you're thirsty, He is living water. When your life is unstable, He is the rock that doesn't move. When you realize, I do not have what I wanted, then suddenly you discover that God is exactly what you needed. And somebody came here this morning and you're empty and you're lacking and you're going to look to Him and He is going to become everything that you needed. Stop waiting for what you want and start working with what you have. Offer God what you have and trust God to give you what you need. Because when you don't have what you really want, you discover that God is what you really needed. In closing, I want to say that if anything I have said today has struck a chord, then we would love to pray with you. There are people, other people as well as myself, who are happy to do that and willing to pray with you. It's in total confidence. You don't need to be specific about what you want prayer for. It's not shared with anyone else. It's not an indication, as I said last week, it's not an indication of failure or that there's anything wrong with you. It is simply saying to God, here I am. Here I am. Will you fill me? Will you meet my need today? So if you're struggling with something that's too big for you, or you just want to offer what you have to God, then here are some choices. You can choose to do nothing and just go home. You can fill in a wee card on the prayer tree, and we'll pray for you during the week. You could maybe ask somebody that you know to pray for you. Or maybe during this last hymn when we sing it, or at the end as people are leaving, if you come down to these front few pews, then the prayer team will pray with you. Well, let's just pray just now. Lord, we are here today, and some of us are hurting. Some of us are finding it hard to make ends meet. Some of us are overwhelmed. Some are empty. Some need to bring what they have, and we all need more of you. Would you help us to empty ourselves of the rubbish that we carry around and allow you to fill us with your Spirit? Give us a supernatural peace that goes beyond our human ability to understand. Lord, would you be our comforter and our provider? I pray that you would build our faith so that we can offer you what we have rather than wait for what we want. Father, would you speak in this place today? Would you open our spiritual eyes and ears to see and to hear and to understand what it is that you're saying? Would you give us wisdom and understanding? Would you give us courage to follow you? Would you give us what we need to see our dreams become a reality? Would you be everything that we need